today is probably going to be a little bit different than the normal interview that you get, the normal interview that you do, but I'm sure it'll be fine. We can talk about like different trends in culture, especially considering that you have a lot of prominence on TikTok. You're all over TikTok. You're more on TikTok than I am, I would say. How do you feel about that?
I feel seen and heard by young people, and I understand it actually. My message to them has been that they're not even 20th century people, and they shouldn't live their lives at the effect of bad economic ideas left over from the 20th century. So I feel seen and heard by them, but I think that's because they feel seen and heard by me. They don't have an institutional memory of a time ever in their lives when it felt like government was on their side, and they feel that government policy, understandably they feel this way because it's fact, does more to thwart than to support their own dreams for self-actualization and living the lives they want to live.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's just start with, why are you running? What's your goal for running on the Democratic ticket?
Well, somebody has to say certain things. This country needs to start over. We need to end an aberrational chapter of neoliberalism in this.
It's interesting that she's like, oh, they don't have a 20th century. They're not from the 20th century. Young people aren't, so they shouldn't have a 20th century mindset. They shouldn't, in terms of economics, they shouldn't have to adopt these views. But the economic model demonstrated, built in the 20th century was very successful in the United States and in Western Europe and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan. Like, it's not perfect, and there's things we can do better, especially in the United States. In the United States, we've gone too far in the, I don't know if you want to call it neoliberal direction as she has, but we definitely have gone too far in one direction here. We don't have healthcare in this country. We don't have holidays in this country. We don't have sick leave in this country. We don't have even mandatory vacation days. Like in Europe, most or in many European countries, you can have 30 vacation days a year. In America, there's you know what the federal number is? 0. And the average number that the average person has is 10. 10 vacation days per year compared to 30, which is mandatory in Europe for full-time workers. They don't have we don't have universal health care here. So I think Europe has done a much better job actually of building a system and a society that actually values workers and values people. So it takes the gains of capitalism and distributes them to some extent in a way that benefits everyone. Whereas in the United States, we still haven't made that change, in part because we have a first past the post political system, in part because of money in politics, in part because a large portion of the country doesn't want that. So depends on how you ask the polling questions, but a portion of the country doesn't want that, and they are able to gerrymander and stay in power even though they don't have popular support. Anyway, JT says it's 2 per year. Oh, what's 2 per year? Sorry. And Claus says, I feel like she's conflating economics of the second Bush era with the 20th century economics. When that's not, well, especially the economics of the 20th century were wild, right? I mean, you had everything from Reagan to FDR, right? The 20th century, you had the New Deal, you had the Great Society, you had you had desegregation, which had major economic impacts on the United States. Like, you had all sorts of things, and you also had this sort of Reaganomics and this sort of privatization of the government. And in some ways was good, right? Deregulation actually was pretty successful in many ways. Like the fact that we have craft beer in this country is like largely due to deregulation. Like, I'm not sure how many people know that, but yeah, like craft beer, the fact that it's as common as it is today is partly due to deregulation. Also, I think deregulation with the airlines has proven to be like pretty effective actually in regards to lowering airfare. Now, the people who were against that would say, well, yeah, it's cheaper. It's cheaper now to fly, but the service is shitty. You don't have these in-flight meals, and there's some truth in that, right? Because the truth is that they used to be able to. They didn't used to be able to. They weren't allowed to compete on price in the past. Airlines weren't, so they started to compete in terms of quality of service, in terms of like, oh, we're gonna have like better food, and then they were able to compete on price because they were deregulated and allowed to have price competition, which meant that maybe quality in terms of food wasn't going as well. But the fact is, the vast majority of people, they don't care if like the airline has good food. They care if they can cheaply fly across the country. And that's what the vast majority of people care about. And it's good. It's good. It's much better to have cheaper airfares than it is to pay, twice as much but have better food, or 20, well, not twice as much, but say 20%, 30% more, but had the food's slightly better, especially since you can't usually taste the food anyway. Oh, Blue, you're getting aggressive, huh? Since I'm kind of a 90s guy, I feel I associate 20th century economics with the Clinton administration, even though that's probably not entirely accurate either, though that's at least in the 20th century while Bush was in the 21st. And JT says that's because Clinton had the tech boom.
Country. We need to repudiate the corporate tyranny that now owns our Congress, owns our government, and has its tentacles in every corner of our civilization. To me, that's what the Democratic Party should be saying. And if nobody's going to run for president saying it as a Democrat, I am.
I mean, that quite literally happened last time around with Joe Brandon. I mean, he and I guess 7 other candidates directly ran in opposition to Medicare for All at a time when this necessity was only being voiced by one candidate, Bernie Sanders. Has your perspective on Medicare for All and its viability changed over the years?
Yeah, I had a kind of amazing grace type of moment. Because last time I thought, well, Medicare, Medicaid, we can get there. And I did have a moment when I sort of got it. Yeah, we need Medicare for all.
What was that for you? What was that moment of change?
I don't actually remember it. I don't remember when it was. I don't remember if it was during the campaign or after. Forgive me, my phone is ringing.
Don't worry, I just called Joe Biden Joe Brandon. This is not supposed to be a professional interview. So there was another guy who ran on a campaign of trying to improve turnout for younger voters, and unfortunately, I mean, he's sitting right there on a cutout, but unfortunately that didn't come to fruition. Do you have any other opinions on how to mobilize younger voters?
Well, I had not made an effort to mobilize young voters. I mean, I'm grateful that they're responding, but I don't have any strategy like that. I'm seeking to tell the truth as I understand it. I want the American people at any age to have the option of a complete repudiation of this aberrational neoliberal chapter of American history, and we need to start over in this country. We need a new beginning. We need an emergency level transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We need to move from a war economy to a peace economy, and we need to push back against what is essentially a matrix of corporate tyranny. So to me, whether you're 80 years old or 18 years old, whether it's about the next 20 years of your life or the life of your grandchildren, it's about the state of our democracy and possibly the state of our humanity. Even the habitability of the planet could be at risk here. This is not a time to slow walk. It's not a time for incrementalism. It's not a time for endorsing someone.
An interesting question that I've been considering more and more is, how do I feel about this sort of rhetoric? This sort of populist rhetoric of like, oh, the corporations, the corporations, the corporations. Like, I think there is something to the idea that the United States has probably too much corporate influence. That the American politics, through lobby, well, I mean through lobbying. I don't care about lobbying. Lobbying's fine. But through super PACs, that there's a major issue. But at the same time, like, the studies on this aren't like, they seem to indicate actually that by and large, like, yes, like, rich people get what they want, quote unquote, more often than poor people, but only when they have middle class support on an issue. And it's just like a super nuanced topic actually, because the people who seem to be the decision makers in American society, as strange as it is to say, because I know so many people are like bought into this idea that like everything is controlled by the super ultra wealthy elite. That's like what a bunch of people on the internet think now. But it's super nuanced, because it turns out that like the rich people are only able to get what they want if the middle class agrees with them, and if the middle class agrees with the poor, then the poor get what they want too. Like, if you look at public policy preferences and how they turn out in terms of policy, like, it's very, very strange, because it doesn't map onto the Illuminati or the rich people control everything. It seems like things are a bit more democratic, though not as much as they should be in the United States than you'd think. Though at the same time, through gerrymandering, it's probably becoming increasingly less so, significantly less so.